Hi everyone, I'm Jim McDonald. I head up the advisory services practice for Identitropy. Today we'll be talking about selecting an IAM technology, whether to select a best-of-breed technology or a fully integrated solution, and then how to go about selecting the right technology vendor. Today with me I've got Mario Dusai, Mike Woodburn, Chad Wolcott, and Wayne Sissel, who will be discussing this topic.
Well, I think a very important thing to know is your vision. What is your end state that your organization is looking for? And then when you start getting into looking at different technologies, you have to see whether or not these different pieces, if you are looking at best of breed versus integrated, you have to ensure that all of these different vendors are sticking to the standards, because then standards are going to be very important for interoperability with different parts of your ultimate solution.
You really bring up the good point there about interoperability. Obviously, if we had our choice, we'd always take the best of everything. But whenever you need these things to function together as a system, you need to look at how they're going to operate together. And the best way, of course, as you mentioned, is by using standards, particularly open standards that are available, clearly well documented, and ideally you're going to look at ones that aren't so broad that a vendor may say, well, our system supports standard XYZ, but in reality what they do is they support a subset of the standard. From my experience, ultimately it's going to come down to what's that total cost of ownership of a fully integrated stack versus going with best-of-breed vendors. With every separate vendor you have to work with, you have a separate procurement process that you have to go through. They all have their own separate maintenance cycles. They all have their own release cycles for their own products, which makes the management of your deployment a lot more complex. So one of the things we always talk about is what's going to be that total cost of ownership of this system. And whenever you look at those different vectors, it makes the ownership of a best-of-breed solution a lot higher than that of a full-stack vendor.
Yeah, I think when you look at the full stack vendors, you certainly get some advantages. You have that one throat to choke around the actual deployment of that solution. One of the downsides of it, really, though, you have to look at your existing systems that you're working with. Right? Oftentimes, the big stack vendors, the value proposition there and the control that they can introduce from a governance and a compliance type of a perspective is really because you have to rip and replace out all of your applications, all of your core HR, ERP, financial systems, and then layer on top of that the control and governance processes that those stack solutions can provide. And there's a lot of value in that, but there's also a lot of heavy lifting involved in getting there, and a lot of potential business disruption that you have to assess and get people bought into.
The other aspect of all of this as well is doing due diligence around the vendors themselves. What is their history? What is their roadmap? Are they going to be here today, gone tomorrow? That whole side also needs to be considered, in addition to obviously the technology and what they can bring to the table.
I think when selecting a product, an organization needs to look at the functional fit as well as the non-functional fit for that organization. Listen, I think the bottom line is that there's not one right solution out there to fit every company, and that's why all of these vendors exist. Know what you're trying to accomplish, and then the sub-features under that, and then you can start to shortlist vendors. I also mentioned you need to look at those non-functional fits. So one of the things I've run into with different clients over time is Windows shops, right? They built everything around Active Directory. All of their people are MCSEs, all of their technical people are MCSEs, and they're just much more comfortable in a Windows environment. To me that tells me that from an IAM system perspective, if they could get something that's more Windows friendly, they'd be happier with that. There are other organizations where they would never run their IAM system on Windows because they still have the perspective that Windows is not as stable of an environment as Linux and Java, right? And so understanding those helps you further refine your list of what I call your short list. Now, once you've accomplished a short list, and whether that's your top 5 vendors or your top 3 or your top 10, then it makes sense to do further due diligence. It's maybe have those vendors do a demo for you, have those users respond to an RFP, whatever is a good cultural fit for your organization, so that you kind of engage with those vendors and know more about their product. You know, I certainly wouldn't recommend spending a lot of time with your top 10 vendors. Try to get it down to 2 or 3 before you start really investigating those solutions, having vendors come in and do proof of concept at least. But certainly, use those criteria around functional and non-functional, what's available publicly to shortlist, and then do the further investigation to get down to your final 1 or 2 candidates.
I think what you're saying there, Jim, is it's really important to have a process and methodology to go ahead and do this sort of a vendor evaluation. So you're just not shooting from the hip as you're going through this whole process here, but managing the process in such a way that you get consensus among stakeholders and constituents, you get everybody on board with this whole process moving forward and are asking the right questions and making the right decisions.
I think it's also important as you're going through the process of selecting, regardless if it's a vendor or an integrator, is to leverage the available networks and communities that are available out there. Talk to customers, other customers of these vendors, and really understand what they've learned throughout their program of implementing those solutions. And that goes for both the technology vendors, but also the system integrators. There's lots of system integrators out there, some very specialized, some more general, and talk to their customers and get a sense for what their skills that they brought to the table, what the value proposition was of leveraging those consultants.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chad. So getting customer references, knowing that a customer is committed to your industry is great. That's kind of priceless.